Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Nomad World Weekly Lecture. This week, I am here with Ryan Ferguson and Amanda Kingsmith of the World Wanderers. Welcome to the show, Ryan and Amanda.
Thanks for having us, Becky. We're excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Becky.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk with you guys today about starting a family as digital nomads. And I know you have a lot to share because you guys were digital nomads for quite a long time before you decided to start a family. So first, I want to talk about that. Can you tell us about your background and how you guys became digital nomads?
Yeah, for sure. So we had done two big backpacking trips together, one in 2011 and one in 2014. In between there was like a gap of working corporate jobs, big kid jobs, kind of figuring out if that was the path for us, which spoiler alert, it wasn't. And then also saving money so we could go on that second trip. And when we came back from that second trip, we were like, we can't just keep like spending all of our savings in 6 months and then return to Canada where we're from and work jobs we're not passionate about. Like, is there a way for us to do this continuously? And so that's when we really started thinking about and looking into the possibilities of, quote unquote, digital nomad life, which people weren't talking a lot about in 2014. And so we really just, I guess, started working on projects. We started the World Wanders at that point. We started learning from other people. We started figuring out, skills that we had. And in 2015, I was able to take my stuff online. Ryan had a full-time job that was in person in Atlanta, Georgia. But then shortly after that, probably within a year, we were both nomadic, both, remote, and we've been working and traveling remotely ever since, I guess, the fall of 2016.
Yeah, fall of 2016, we went to Asia. We went to the Philippines and Singapore, and then spent 8 months traveling around Asia, and then have spent a lot of time in Latin America since then. Haven't been able to get back to Europe since we've been doing digital nomad life, but a bunch of Latin America, a bunch of Asia, lots of time in Canada and the States as well.
Great. Well, I want to ask quickly too, how did you guys first meet?
Yeah, so we met at the University of Calgary back in 2008. Yeah. We both studied business at the University of Calgary, but we actually met through friends. I lived in a house with a group of girls, and three of those girls had gone to high school with one of Ryan's roommates. He lived in a house kind of down the street from me with a group of guys. And so our friend group naturally kind of became, the two houses plus some other stragglers that we recruited, and the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah. So did you guys both feel that you had this like wandering spirit and that you wanted to travel? Was it somebody's idea first, or how did that come about that you both decided to get on the road?
Yeah, I don't actually remember. I feel like we both kind of relate to this experience of growing up, especially, I don't know if it's the same quite as much for Amanda, but I grew up in like a small town. It's near like a small town that's near like a small city. Um, And so like growing up in Canada and a place like that, you really have the sensation that like the world is out there. Like it's not like growing up in New York and you like turn on the TV and there's movies about New York and it feels like you're there. Everything feels like, okay, it's out there. And so I remember from like the youngest age, just thinking like, oh, as soon as I finish high school, I'm leaving, because that's what like a ton of people do. You finish high school, you go off to university in a different city, and then you live your life. So wanting to do that. And then I don't remember where the idea of travel really started getting into my head. But I think the show Departures had a lot to do with it. I don't know if you've ever seen that, Becky, but it's originally a Canadian show that was out around the time I think of finishing high school, starting university. And so I always had the idea in my head, like, okay, I'm going to finish university and then go travel for a while. And I think Amanda had basically the same plan. So I remember at one point just kind of being like, oh, this is kind of both what we're planning to do. Why don't we plan to do it together? I remember one day, it must have been like early in our fourth year of university, looking like, oh, what are the things we're excited about doing? And running to the Bulls was like one of the cool things. And so we booked a place to stay for running to the Bulls, which was like our first kind of commitment to it. And we're like, okay, I guess we're like actually going to do this.
I love that. I love it. Often starts that way, right? You have this one idea of like a travel bucket list item, and then you go on that trip and you're like, what if I could make this my lifestyle? How can I do that? Is it possible?
Yeah, for sure. That was definitely the case for us. It was like, that first trip was just bucket list after bucket list item as we were kind of, roaming around the world essentially in 6 months. And coming back, it was just like there's got to be more to life than just like working in a cubicle in, cold Calgary, Alberta. And I think we thought like, okay, we'll take this gap year and then we'll come back and we'll do like big kid stuff. Like we'll be adults now. And it just didn't feel right. Like we gave it a good shot, but it just didn't feel right. Like we weren't super happy in that stage of life. And it was just like, okay, is there a way to do something that we're more excited about, more passionate about? And that's really where we started thinking about like, could we just travel continuously and make money while doing it?
Yeah. And if I can just add one thing, I feel like there was like two big seeds that were planted for us that trip. So the first one was just like spending that time traveling. I think for both of us, really feeling like really alive for like maybe not the first time, but for like a consistent period of time after going through that, like I'm in high school, so I can go to university. I'm going to university. Like you're kind of enjoying the process and making good friends, but it does feel like you just on a conveyor belt. You're not waking up each day and thinking like, hey, what do I want to do today? What am I excited about? And so that experience traveling, I think, yeah, planted this flag of like, wow, life could be like this. Obviously, you can't just live a life of leisure. It's going to get boring at some point in time. And then also, we remember being in Switzerland at a hostel there and meeting a guy who was like, oh yeah, I'm a programmer. I just like am traveling Europe and doing my work as I go. And that just kind of like blew my mind. This was like 2011, and being like, oh wow, that's really cool. Like, and kind of thinking that wasn't accessible to me. But I think for me, that kind of stuck with me too over time of being like, okay, this is something at least some people are doing somewhere. And that's pretty cool.
Okay, now I want to switch over to this idea of starting a family as digital nomads, because as we've heard now, you guys have been traveling for a long time. And I want to ask, I don't know if this is going to get personal, but when did you decide to start a family? And if you don't mind, can you share if you decided that you were going to be near your family when you gave birth, or your friends to help out, or how did that process all begin?
Yeah. So I think that starting a family was on our radar for a couple of years before it actually happened. Like it was something that we had, discussed. I mean, discussed in our relationship and like prior to getting married and stuff like that. We had just discussed like, do we want kids? Yeah, we want kids. And then, Becky, are we freezing?
No, you're fine on this
Oh,
end.
okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. And then pandemic happened. So we went to Panama. We had the idea of like maybe Panama could be a good place to have a baby. We were kind of interested in the idea of, I guess, birth tourism, the idea of having a baby abroad in another country where the baby could get citizenship. Um, and we were in Panama, pandemic hit. We ended up going back to Canada. The topic of having a baby didn't really come up during that time because the world just felt pretty weird. And then we left Canada, sorry, I went down to Mexico in the fall of 2020. And that's when the topic kind of came up again, is like, okay, maybe 2021's the year where we'll start trying to have a baby. And then we got invited to a friend's wedding and, we hadn't done anything for ages. And I was like, well, let's just like enjoy this trip and then we can talk about it after. I was like, I don't want to be pregnant for this wedding. I just want to enjoy myself. And so we got back to Mexico, I guess in March of 2021. And we were like, okay, cool. We're going to do like a big medical exam, just make sure everything's good with our health. And then if everything's hunky dory, we can start trying. And we ended up getting pregnant pretty much immediately, which is obviously a huge blessing and stuff like that. And so we were like, okay, I guess we're having a baby in 9 months. And so I think I Googled, like after I took like 3 pregnancy tests, confirmed I was pregnant. It's like, okay, like, what do you do? Like, what do you do when you're pregnant? Like, I didn't have a doctor. We were in Puerto Vallarta at the time. And it's like, okay, I guess we got to figure this out. And we we had residency in Mexico at that point. We were comfortable in Mexico, but we were just trying to figure out like where we would give birth if we were going to give birth in Mexico. So kind of started diving into that research. And then also had a conversation like, do we go back to Canada to do this? Because there's obviously, huge pros about that. There's cons also, which we can talk about if that's interesting to you, Becky. But we kind of decided, okay, we'll go back to Canada, to do a couple of like the big sort of pregnancy tests that you do, one in which is your like 20-week anatomy scan. And so they just make sure everything's good with mom and baby. And we were like, if everything's good, then we're going to have the baby in Mexico. And I feel like even before then we were pretty sold on having her here, but we wanted to just, do our due diligence just in case anything did happen. But for us, it was basically like, okay, we're not going to have the baby in PV where we were living. So we're going to pick a new city in Mexico to go to and settle down. And we don't have a home in Canada. Like, we haven't lived full time in Canada since 2015. So for us, it would have been like the exact same amount of work. Like, we don't have furniture in either country. We don't have a home in either country. So it's like we would have needed to pick a city. I would have needed to find a doctor. I would have needed to find a midwife, decided where I was going to give birth. So we just kind of went through the pros and cons and decided, there's a lot of pros for staying in Mexico. One being the climate, two being the healthcare being really good here, three, the cost of having a midwife, and then also the fact that the baby would get a second passport on birth. So that's what we ended up deciding.
Yeah. And I think maybe one other factor as well was the fact that we had a February due date. And so if you were thinking of like, oh, where would we go? Our families live in different places in Canada. So there's not one kind of, hey, it would be for this place for sure. But if we were going to go back to Alberta, that would mean like going through the hardest months of winter while Amanda's pregnant, which is just
and
like,
then with a newborn.
And then having a newborn when it's, February in Alberta. So tons of things lined up. And I think also we'd had some pretty good experiences with the healthcare system in Mexico, just kind of knowing that like, I think a lot of in our heads, we imagine sometimes, especially coming from Canada, there's a lot of like messaging about Canadian healthcare is amazing. Canadian healthcare is amazing. But when you actually get some like hands-on experience with like the Canadian system and some other systems, you can kind of start to appreciate some of the other things. So yeah, Amanda did a really good job of the other parts of that decision as well. But it is funny. I feel like as humans, sometimes we have this like salmon, like, oh, we're pregnant. We need to like swim back to our home to give birth.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely thought about it, even though we've been, nomadic and haven't been living in Canada for so long, but it just seemed like, is this the responsible thing to do? And we wanted to really assess that decision because, of course, the baby having a second passport is an amazing pro to having her in Mexico, but we wanted to make sure that like, my health and her health were like our number one priorities. And when it actually came down to figuring out which would be best, we felt like Mexico was the right decision for that as well.
Yeah, and I can understand that you were already residents of Mexico by that time. You were in the system, and I don't know, is it free? Would it have been free to have the baby in Canada? And was it free, or do you mind sharing a bit of expenses in Mexico for having a baby? I know as an American, thinking of healthcare and the costs, always very fascinated by the comparisons and things like that.
Yeah. So Canada's a healthcare system. It would have been free for us to have a baby, and it would have been free for us to either deliver in a hospital or deliver with a midwife. We delivered with a midwife. So we could have done that for free in Canada. In Mexico, because we're residents, there is an option for free healthcare. It's through their public healthcare system. They have a really high rate of C-sections here. So that wasn't the option that I wanted to go with, just because I didn't want a C-section unless it was like an absolute necessity in order to keep everyone safe and healthy. So we went through the private system and worked through a midwife. And so it cost us like almost 24,000 pesos, which is
1,200, 1,300 US dollars.
Okay. And
And that
obviously,
was like a number of checkups leading up to it. The birth, our midwives were like amazing. They were back like
they came
basically every day
yeah.
for an entire week. Yeah, just like incredible experience with them and super, super affordable.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was my question. I'm sure that would have included a lot of like, pre-care and meeting you several times and making you feel comfortable.
Yeah, and I think something for us that was important because like Amanda has like she invests a lot of time and energy into kind of understanding like the best ways to do this for a mom and for a baby and learning about it over the course of a number of years. And so for us, being in a place where we had kind of the agency to make decisions with the people we wanted to make decisions with, like in Canada, yeah, it's provided via public healthcare, but some of your options can be quite limited because of the kind of the structure of the regulation. So, hey, not in love with my doctor. I want to switch doctors. Like, you can't just go out and find and pick, I want to work exactly with you. Or when you're going through the kind of home birth system, there's like, hey, you hit this timeline, that means this happens. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Whereas in Mexico, you can have more flexibility. We also have some friends here who did go the hospital route, and they were able to deliver in a hospital in a more traditional sense, but like the hospital was a private hospital. There's like a birthing pool, and they had a doula there. And I think that for them was still it was under 30,000 pesos, so under 1,500 US dollars.
Yeah, I think because she ended up getting a C-section and then staying a couple nights in the hospital. So obviously that stuff will like add up a little bit. But I think when all was said and done, it was maybe double the cost of what we paid, which is still extremely affordable, especially considering like the hospitals here, especially the private hospitals, like they move you into a room, you order room service, you have a nurse that's kind of like your designated nurse, your doctor is there to check on you. Like it's very different from, I think, what we imagine in terms of, especially, Canadian healthcare and I think American healthcare as well.
I also want to ask a question I'm sure a lot of people would be thinking. What was the language barrier like for you? Were you nervous? How did you feel about being able to communicate with your midwives when you were in the process of giving birth?
Yeah, for sure. So that was one thing I was actually nervous about. I found this midwife via Facebook group. She was recommended a number of times. Midwifery is not as common in Mexico as it is in Canada and the US. So there's not as many midwife options. And so what we actually did is before we flew back to Canada for those big tests I was talking about, we actually flew to Querétaro, where we currently live, which is a city we like first discovered because we came to visit you here, Becky. So very cool because you're kind of a part of this whole story. And we really liked it when we came to visit you. We were only here a week, but we're like, we could totally, live here. And so we had a consultation with her. We got to meet her, learn about her philosophies of birth, how she works, et cetera, et cetera. Felt like really connected with that. And
that was all in Spanish.
Yeah. And so that was all in Spanish. And one of the things I was nervous about was that she was maybe not going to take us on as a client because my Spanish isn't totally fluent. And, it's improved over the last year, considering we've gone through this whole process in Spanish, but I didn't know any of the words for anything at that point in terms of like birth and pregnancy and stuff. And she was like, I've delivered babies for foreigners before. She's like, we'll be totally fine. She's like, I speak enough English that like, we'll be able to get by. And she's like, if you forget how to speak Spanish when you're like in active labor or transition, she's like, don't worry, like, we'll be okay. And I was like, okay, that makes me feel a lot better. And I did actually get to a point during my birth where I just couldn't speak Spanish, and it was fine. I had two midwives there who both speak a little bit of English, plus Ryan's Spanish is almost fluent. And so he was able to act as like kind of a barrier there. And we were totally fine. There was never any instance where I was like, this was a bad idea, or I regret this. In saying that, my friend that I mentioned earlier who went the hospital route, her and her husband speak almost no Spanish. And so for them, delivering in Mexico is really important that they had a doctor that spoke English. And it's completely possible to find an OB here who speaks English as well as Spanish, as well as, she had a bilingual doula who was able to support her in case there was like, language barriers and stuff like that. So if you don't speak any Spanish, I do feel like that could add a level of, nervousness or anxiety, that type of thing to the situation. But it is possible to find, English speaking doctors. And we actually just did an interview with a friend who also delivered twins in Mexico City. And it was really important for her to find an English speaking doctor too. So it's totally possible.
Yeah. And I think, like if you're in Mexico City, Puerto Vallarta, I'm assuming Cancun would be like this, even here in Querétaro, like if you're going to a private hospital, there's going to be a lot of English speaking doctors there. And so unless you were trying to give birth in like, a smaller city in Mexico, it might be a challenge. But even here, like I know there was like quite a few options for English speaking doulas. And our midwife had said like, oh, if you would feel more comfortable, like I can find someone who can serve as like a doula who can translate. So yeah. And then since then we've, our pediatrician is a Spanish speaking doctor. I don't know if she speaks much English at all, but we've been able to go through that whole process, which has been kind of cool and kind of interesting for us to like really force us to improve our Spanish abilities and learn all sorts of new vocabulary as well.
Oh, thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing this process because I can only, there's all these steps to it. And I think people have a lot of barriers in their mind thinking it's not possible, like you said, to maybe find the English support they might need or their local language. But yeah, I think it's like you were saying, and Ryan, Amanda really planned and looked a lot through all these options before you found what you were looking for. Can you tell me a little bit about how you prepared for the birth of your baby? Like, where did you find a long-term apartment beforehand in Querétaro, or how did you prepare for having Louise, your daughter, come into the world and actually start to become part of your family?
Yeah, so we ended up finding an Airbnb and we rented it for 7 months, which took us from the time we arrived here back from Canada in like October 2021 through until like I think May 2022, and I was due in February. So we knew we'd have a couple months in that apartment as the baby was growing. And then we weren't really sure what life was going to look like after that. We weren't sure if we were going to go back to Canada for a little bit and see family and friends. We weren't sure if we were going to start traveling again right away. We ended up signing a lease on another house here and moved into a more long-term type of situation because we really love it here. But yeah, we found that place actually when we came to meet our midwife. We did a little bit of like a walking tour throughout the city, just Ryan and I kind of looking at areas we'd want to live in, found an apartment building that we really liked, and then ended up finding an amazing Airbnb on it, and it was available long term. So we actually just like booked it right then and there. So we had our
Yeah.
accommodation lined up while we were here in the summer of 2021 for the fall of 2021, which was really relieving that we didn't have to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. We were thinking of it kind of like we want to maintain like our options. And so we know we want to settle down somewhere during like the third trimester and the first couple months of having a newborn baby, but weren't sure like what we wanted to be doing. But yeah, we found this apartment and we're kind of looking at it like we know we want like the space we're living in to be really nice. And it almost like doesn't matter what the broader city is like at that stage because we're going to be spending so much time at home. But then we went back to Canada, told our parents in person, did some of our like medical stuff in Canada before returning. And we're also like, okay, it'd be really awesome to have a car. And so we actually took our car back from Canada, brought it down with us to Querétaro. And yeah, had the car and had the setup. And then, so yeah, we were here, started engaging with our midwife again. I guess that would have been like around like 6th or 7th month.
Yeah, I was about 24 weeks, 25 weeks.
Yeah. And so through our midwives, they had like a course. So we were doing that, which was also in Spanish, which was great because it kind of allowed us to feel more and more comfortable with like
the words.
Yeah. Like, oh, what's the word for swelling or itching or mucus
or like dilation.
Yeah. Or like even some of these, yeah. A lot of medical words obviously translate easy because they have Latin roots, but like some of the conditions that can happen when you're in pregnancy.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, as we kind of led up to it, we were like preparing lots of food, making sure we had all the supplies and everything, because we were doing a home birth as well was the plan. So wanted to have all that stuff ready. And then, yeah, just a lot of kind of waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, I was like 8 days past my due date. So Lou took her time to come and yeah, I was very pregnant. I remember you were here in like mid-January of 2022. And I was like, yeah, we can do this on the weekend, assuming I don't go into labor. And it was like, joke's on me. I didn't deliver for like 3 more weeks after that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I really did think maybe it's going to happen when I'm here. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
But I'm so happy that you found a city that you really felt comfortable in. I think that's obviously very key when a digital nomad family is thinking of, well, digital nomad couple, let's say, is starting to think of a family. And I have to ask the big question now, how has life changed since you became parents as digital nomads?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just becoming a parent is really special. It's been really amazing. And it's like kind of feels like Lou has just been with us forever. Like she just feels like the perfect little like third musketeer to our clan, which is really special and amazing and whatnot. But it's definitely, I mean, having a baby is a lot of work. And, Ryan's working full time, I'm working part time. So we've got a lot on our plate just with, that life and then also taking care of her. So I would say we're definitely like living life a little bit slower than we were before, but still getting out to travel with her. It's been important for us that we've like adventured as much as possible. It was a little bit challenging in the beginning. Like obviously we rested and stuff while she was little, and then we started by taking a couple road trips, one which was to actually get her Mexican passport. And then we were waiting for her Canadian passport so we could like go and do something, because Mexicans need a visa to go to the US. So we couldn't go to the US until we had our Canadian passport. We couldn't go to Canada until we had our Canadian passport. So we were in a little bit of a waiting game to get the passports and stuff organized. And then, yeah, I think we've just kind of settled into, I guess, more of like we have a base and we're traveling from there. And then now that she's getting a bit bigger, starting to plan a bit more like bigger trips for 2023.
Yeah, you really kind of just get like thrown into the work, especially with something like where like Mexico, right? Like you're just, at first you're changing diapers and stuff, but then you're like, hey, we need to do all this paperwork to get the birth certificate, because once we get the birth certificate, then we can do this and do the other thing. And so that and like all our residency stuff that we've been going through, the time's really flying by. But I also feel really grateful. I feel like the timing has worked out perfectly for us, where we weren't giving birth like at the start of the pandemic and having, our baby have to go through that entire thing as she grows up. Like she's not having to see very many people interacting with her wearing masks, which is important to us. But also kind of for us, because this year we've been relatively stable, I think more as kind of nomads, it's like, hey, we're not traveling as much as we normally would, but I think compared to the average parents, we're probably traveling a lot.
Yeah.
Like we drove back to Canada in July and spent a week in Texas and have done all these road trips in Mexico. But yeah, we're really excited for this next year. We're planning some travels to go to Colombia at the start of the year, looking at maybe Japan kind of towards the end of spring, middle of the year. So it's kind of like a nice, like, hey, we've had this year to really settle into it. And as the world's opening up, we're kind of like opening up personally and kind of getting more excited about traveling.
Yeah, I feel like I would just echo what Ryan said, where the timing has been good. Like I really didn't feel like traveling a lot, especially near the second half of my pregnancy. It was pretty much like we traveled at like the perfect time. Like we were living in Puerto Vallarta during my first trimester. We went back to Canada during my second trimester. Then we had this epic road trip back to Mexico, and we arrived here and I was like ready to nest. I was like, okay, I'm getting quite big. I'm quite uncomfortable. I'm just ready to like make this apartment feel like home and prepare for our baby. We did like one little trip for Thanksgiving last year and then didn't travel again after that, because I was 32 weeks when we got back, and you're not really supposed to fly past that point. Plus it's just like I couldn't even like reach for to get my like purse from underneath the seat in front of me. Like it's pretty uncomfortable at that point. And then I didn't really have like the urge to do anything or go anywhere for the first couple months that Lou was born. Like you really just want to be in bed and you're sleeping a lot, and there's just a lot of like you're nursing and trying to keep like my own calories up and stuff to make milk. And so we were really glad, I think, to be settled during that period. And then as we started feeling like ready for adventure, we started with a couple of road trips kind of close to home, just to get the baby used to being, in the car and going into an Airbnb or sleeping in a different spot. And then, like Ryan said, we took a pretty big adventure in July. Once we got her passport, she was 5 months at that point. And that was a pretty like good time to travel with her. And just continuing to plan more trips. But I would say it's definitely like been helpful that a lot of the world has still been closed up until this point, or there's been big restrictions, because we haven't really had the desire to go places. And I think if we didn't have the baby, we might feel a bit like frustrated by the fact that the pandemic's like carried on for so long. But instead it's been like, yeah, no, we're fine. I think now that the world is like mostly back open and things are mostly back to normal, we're feeling that like we see all of our friends traveling. We're like, okay, we're like ready to kind of get to it a little bit more. But I think for the next little while, our rhythm will be a base here in Querétaro, and then taking some smaller trips as well as some bigger trips. So some local trips in Mexico to places we haven't been. And then, like Ryan said, we're going to do a pretty big trip to Colombia and probably a pretty big trip to Japan. And then we'll probably we will go back to Canada in the summer and stuff to see family.
I think it's amazing. And I think you're absolutely right. It was perfect timing. I think all of us felt like we shouldn't be going many places, and we all felt this, feeling of nesting, and I think it's wonderful. And yes, I also agree 2023 for all of us is probably going to be this more expansive feeling, and Lou is just going to get more and more used to it. And I think she's already a born traveler. So
Yeah, she
Yeah.
seems to like it. One thing that I think was really important for us kind of going into this was obviously we have our life and our lifestyle and the things we've been doing, but we're adding another person into that. And I think for us, it's really important to make sure that like her needs are heavily considered in that. And obviously when she's bigger, she can tell us what she wants and she can be a part of the decision-making process, but she's so little right now that obviously she can't be like, I want to go here, like she can't talk. She's just a little wee babe. But just kind of getting to know her a little bit and seeing, how does she do with these trips and how does she do with flying and how does she do in the car, and wanting to really adapt our lives to who she is as well. Cause she's, a part of the team now, but she's done amazing. I think yeah, she seems to really like being in the car. She does well on road trips. She did great flying. She's taken 3 flights now, and she's done great on all of them. She loves to like look out the window and stuff. So yeah, I think we got pretty lucky with a little traveler. So I think there'll be lots of adventures in the future with her.
Yeah.
a new world wanderer. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've heard she's already been on your podcast. For those who we have not mentioned this, you have been podcasting for many years now. So I'm sure there's going to be many updates as a Nomad family now as well.
Yeah, if you listen to recent interviews, usually she's sleeping when we start our interviews and wakes up at some point during them in another room. And then you might hear like cooing or like kind of screeching in the background periodically.
Yeah, we've got a nanny twice a week, which is so helpful. That's where she is right now. She's with her nanny. And we haven't had the nanny for the days we've been doing the podcast episodes, but I think we might need to change that up because she's just like, she's getting big now, and she wants to touch the microphone. She wants to put it in her mouth. She wants you to hear what she has to say, all the things. So yeah, she's in a fun age.
Well, I want to ask you guys one final question before we go. So, what has been more difficult about becoming a digital nomad parent than you expected before Louise came into the world? And what has been easier than you expected?
Yeah. I feel like a couple things that come to mind for me. I feel like it really emphasizes just how cool it is to be able to live and work in this way. Like for us, I think it's not necessarily always about the travel, but like especially as a dad, like I took a couple weeks off work, and then going back to work for me doesn't mean like leaving my family every single day and having to spend so much time out of the house. Like I can go into a room and there's unique challenges about like having to have like your baby over there while you're in the room doing work. But it's so nice to be able to like leave and play with the baby for a bit and come back, beyond even traveling. I think that's pretty awesome. I think the hardest thing probably would just be, being here and not having like that stable community and family support is what I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would definitely echo all of that. And then I would just add, because I think I have a slightly different perspective since I mostly do childcare, is like, now traveling is just, there's an added layer to it. Like there's kind of coordinating, like, okay, the baby needs a nap, but she's at an age where she doesn't just like sleep wherever. So we need to think about like what we're doing in the day versus what we're doing in the night. She's got a pretty early bedtime. We're super flexible with that when we're places like we were just in Mexico City, for example, and we're super flexible with her schedule. But at the same time, it's like she has needs, right? So it's like if we're doing something with friends during the day, we need to like wrap it up pretty early so she can get a good night's sleep. We need to have a good bedtime, or we need to make sure we get good naps during the day so that we can like go out for dinner and enjoy ourselves. And she's not like, like frustrated with us because we've pushed her bedtime. So I feel like there's just a bit more coordination. And then it's also like, okay, she needs to eat. Are we in a good place where I can nurse her? Is she going to get distracted? She's recently started eating solids, but that's kind of a bit of a slow process. She doesn't just like eat whatever, whenever. So it's like okay, has she like eaten today? Can she eat what we're eating at the restaurant? There's just like an added layer of thinking that goes into it, which, is totally worth it and it's fine, but it is challenging, I would say. And then for me, because I'm mostly taking care of her while Ryan's working, it's been while we're traveling, it's hard for me to balance working as well. So I would say like mothering, traveling, and working is like a very hard thing to do. When we're here, we've got a bit of childcare, like I mentioned before. So that helps. And then I can use her like nap times and after she's in bed to do the things that I need to do. But if we're like on the go all day, I'm exhausted as well. And then it's like, oh, the thought of doing work is so much. So I would say that those are kind of the biggest challenges, but it's just really cool to see. Like a great thing is like to see the world through her eyes. Like we went to Mexico City and she just learned to clap and she just learned to wave and she just spent like the whole 10 days like clapping and waving at strangers. Like it's just such a joy to see her like in this new place and just you know, like waving at people she doesn't know and just giving them big smiles and trying to get their attention. It's just really cool to see. And I know as she gets bigger, it'll be really, really cool to continue seeing the world like through her eyes. And I think that that's going to kind of, change our perspective on travel and kind of reinvigorate a love for discovering the world. Like, not that we've lost that, but I think just see it through a child's eyes, which I think will be really cool.
And I'm sure you're also getting new interactions from people that you wouldn't get if you were just Ryan and Amanda going around. Now you're having strangers come up, seeing your beautiful baby and interacting with her and you guys, and it has to be different.
Yeah, I feel like especially in Mexico, like there's such a cultural like love for babies and children. Like you just walk down the street and people are like, oh, like hello, waving at the baby, smiling, like even like
Mhm.
construction workers or like grandmas or just like young people, teenagers, like everyone's just like waving at the baby. And we have so many more conversations that come from that. And then
Yeah.
it's also been interesting too for us kind of like because we've kind of shifted a bit out of like nomad life for the past year, have been a bit more stable here while traveling from this base. Um, but just, yeah, making community. I think once you have a child, there's kind of this sense of like, oh, hey, like you're in with us now, like meet these people. We got to connect with these people. There's that sense of community that kind of comes from it as well.
Yeah, we only had a couple friends here until she was born. And part of that was just that like I was in nesting mode. I feel like walking from like the couch to the bed was like as far as I wanted to go some days because I was just really big and uncomfortable. And it's just an introverted period, right? But it's like the baby was born and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm in like mom's groups and okay, like everyone's got, a partner. So now we're getting together for like play dates. We've gone to more birthday parties this year than we've ever gone to ever, I think. It's just like we're in this whole world now and it's been really fun to have like a group of friends and stuff. We haven't had that for a long time, so it's been cool to discover that. And then a lot of our friends are expats, so it's like not only do we have this kind of joint, I guess, commonality of being a foreigner in a city, which I feel like you have as a digital nomad, right? You arrive and like other digital nomads, you have that in common. You love to travel. So that connects you. It's like now a lot of those people also have kids. So we have this like added layer of things that we have in common. So it's been kind of cool to just see that and discover that. And it's been fun to build that over the last year.
Mhm.
I think that's too an answer as to what people might say is like, how can you have people, like, how can you feel included in a community if you're not near your family or friends you grew up with as nomads with a family? But that's it. You're going to connect in new ways that you didn't expect with people that you're going to find in that community. And then you can maybe help each other out and you can, watch each other's children maybe at one point, or, the children will be entertained when you meet up with your friends and they're playing together on the floor, things that you didn't expect. And I think that's what a lot of digital nomads who maybe haven't started families can expect if they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And two, I think there's so many cool new things. Like we have some friends who live more of like a travel heavy lifestyle with older kids, and some of the things that are being created, like world schools or things where people are going. Like we have a couple friends in particular who are in Greece right now, and they're spending a couple months. Their kids are in like a world school there. And it's all these parents and families kind of enabled by remote work can be there still working have their kids in this really cool experience. So I think as time goes on too, there's going to be so many more interesting, cool ways for us to have community, have kind of, careers and families that, can do this from all sorts of different new interesting places.
Well, guys, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Congratulations again on your beautiful little girl, Lou. And I can't wait to meet you guys again in person and meet her in person. And if people want to follow you, where can they go?
Yeah, for sure. So they can find our podcast anywhere that they listen to podcasts, if that's Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever it is. Just look up The World Wanders and you'll be able to find that. Becky's been on the show, so those are good episodes to start with. We also have a couple episodes around actually having a baby abroad. So if you're interested in that, that could be great as well. And then you can also just go to theworldwanders.com to check out everything that we've got there. And then we're The World Wanders podcast on Facebook and Instagram.
Thank you guys so much. And I hope you have a wonderful week. Say hello to Lou for me. And I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Becky.
Becky.
Thank you.